And welcome to our first Stream 2 talk of the day. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations and pay my respects to the elders past and present. I'd also like to extend that respect to any people with a connection to the world's oldest continuing culture who are in the room today or who are joining us via live stream, and to acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. This morning we will be hearing from composer Jasmine Cooper with a tech masterclass on how to make freelance work for you. Please make her feel very welcome.
Okay. I appreciate it. That's so sweet. Okay. I first want to say thank you all for coming to my presentation. I'm really excited to have you all here. There's a lot of stuff that I want to cover, so I'm going to try and zip through the introduction so I can get to everything I want. I am told I talk fast, so if I'm talking too fast, just raise your hand. And I have my phone in my hand because I have a timer to make sure I stay on track, so I'm going to be using that for this. So the first question you probably all have or are wondering is, who am I? So my name is Jasmine Cooper, and I've been in the video game industry for 10 years, I'd say, give or take. I've dabbled in basically all components of audio design, but I prefer to hire myself as and take jobs as a composer. And here are some of the games that I have worked on and are currently working on. So if you're coming to this talk, I'm assuming that you would like to have a freelance career that's very similar to these folks here. I'm hoping that by the end of the talk, and after kind of reflecting on what you need as a person, you might be more open to having a freelance career that's more like my colleagues here. And so this talk is split into 5 sections, and each section has a question that I would like for you to ponder and think about as you either navigate into freelance work or you think about how your freelance journey has been currently. And those 5 questions are: what are my minimum monthly needs? What is my minimum and maximum value? What do I want to do that can be done well? What are ways I can become visible in the video game music space? And how can I achieve a sustainable career in the video game music space? And I'm going to do my best to give as much information as I have to try and be helpful to help you answer these questions if you don't have answers to them. So we're going to go ahead and jump into section 1. Ooh, I'm making good time. Let's go. So section 1 is, what are my minimum monthly needs? Before I go further, I've taught for about 8 years, and one thing that I love doing while I was teaching is having my students talk to each other. And so, yes, I'm going to have y'all do that today. So each section is going to start with a discussion prompt, and I'd like for you to get into groups of 3 or 4. Obviously, it doesn't have to be exactly that, but it allows everybody to be able to contribute who are a part of it. And I'll give you about 2 minutes to kind of just talk amongst yourselves about the question. And then at the end, we're going to have a rapid fire session where you just yell your answers at me, and we'll proceed further into the section. And I don't have a timer because I hate those, but actually I have music that I'll be using to be our timer. And I want to, before we go further, highlight the composer whose music I'm using. Their name is Graham Nesbitt. They are a phenomenal composer, sound designer, and illustrator, and the piece that we're using is from Garden Story, a soundtrack that they scored, and actually the name of the piece is Pillow Leaf. It's a really beautiful soundtrack. I highly recommend it. So our first discussion question is, how much money do you need a month to be content? And when answering this question, please state an area you feel comfortable disclosing. So if that area for you is America, let's say I'd be comfortable with $3,000 a month. For you, it's Sydney, $2,000. But yeah, I'll give you 2 minutes to talk about that. When you're sharing your answers later, I want you to share an answer that you heard. Don't share an answer that you gave. I want you to be active listeners while you're discussing with other people. And at the end of the piece, you're going to hear the Mario level complete sound, and that means discussion's over, and we're going to return here. So we've got DJ Handsome in the back who's going to spin the tunes. And so whenever you're ready, I'll let you guys make your groups yourselves. So you can start whenever you're ready.
$3,000.
Great. Awesome. Can we bring it back? Can we bring it back? Hey, hey. Hey, 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 hey. Awesome. Okay. I heard one thing I heard that was really interesting is someone thinks of their salary in terms of weeks instead of months, and that's something I never thought about. So that's interesting. Yeah. So yell out a couple things that you heard. This is teaching 101. 6,000, okay. And you're not yelling out what you said, what someone else said. So hopefully that makes it easier for you.
This guy said that you could break even on
1,000. Okay, 1,000. All right. Anyone else would like to share something they heard? 4,000. Okay, we got 6, 4, 5, 3, 2, 7. I'm still surprised about that one. Okay. Jini, if you can, could you share what they said online, or? And thank you for those looking online. Hopefully I'm looking at you.
All right. So we have. Is my yeah? There we go. We have 4 answers here. Around 2,000 a month would be good. Around 1,250 to 1,500. 1,500, 3 to 5K.
Okay, awesome. So I'm really glad that many of you are able to answer that question, primarily because if you're trying to transition into freelance work, I believe understanding or being able to answer this question is like imperative to being able to have a freelance career that's sustainable and that you can do for a very long time. And I want to define what I mean by needs. What you need a month is whatever monthly amount that leaves you to feel safe, comfortable, and inspired. And if the financial amount that you want for yourself does not allow you to have these three things, I would inspire you to increase that. And I'm thinking of it from the purpose of trying to transition into freelancing as quickly as possible. But obviously, you realize, depending on what your needs are, that might be difficult to do. But I'm just going to explain this based on my experience going into freelance and realizing how what I thought would be enough for me was not enough for me. So, and essentially, yeah, I'm just saying need budget. So this is a budget sheet that I use. Everything above the dash line is pretty fixed in place, and everything below it is a bit more malleable. And this was my experience first time going freelance, okay? It looked exactly like this. So I did not meet my 3 expectations. Physical safety, I definitely say that I did meet that. I was living in a rural area. The people that I lived around, I taught there for like 2 or 3 years, so I was comfortable with them. But my mental safety was not met. I was extremely isolated, and I did not have the ability to make up for that isolation because I didn't have the money to ensure that I was able to fulfill myself mentally. So I definitely lacked there. Comfortability, I under budgeted, and I didn't leave myself enough room to buffer myself, and I realized the amount of money that I thought I could sustain myself with was not enough. I had to go to a soup kitchen for a month. And inspired, I obviously was inspired the first time that I did it because it's freelance and I had autonomy, but the gray cloud of having to find a way to pay for my life seeped its way into my work. I realized, I did it for a year. 6 months in, I realized I could not do this. It wasn't sustainable. And luckily, I was living with my sister at the time. But this was the budget sheet that I had. $400 because I was splitting rent with my sister. I had a car payment, loan, and savings. And I had a bunch of other stuff that I had to deal with. Because of Obamacare, at the time, I actually could afford health insurance of some type. Groceries were meager, running joke in my family about what I ate at that time. But my needs, where I was, I thought it was $1,500 a month, and it was not feasible for me. And going into it my second time, granted, I've had experience to learn about what my needs are. I moved to Vietnam, and I believe moving to Vietnam was supposed to be my time to understand what it means for me to live, so that way when I come back to America, I can adequately prepare my career for that. And so what I realized, I was a starving artist the first time I went freelance, and it wasn't on purpose, it was just because I didn't prepare myself adequately. What I realized in that time and also living in Vietnam, I realized that what I needed to include into my budget was the freedom for food. I don't eat out a lot, but I want to eat healthy, and I know that I need to have enough money that allows me that malleability. I needed flexible work options. I needed to be able to say, I've got plenty of work coming in, or I want to take this gig. I don't want to work for a month. And I'm able to do that now with DoorDash and driving. It's a bit more feasible for me. I needed to make sure I had spaces to socially interact with others. I definitely like my alone time, but I need to be able to go out and find opportunities to recharge with other people. And the first time I freelanced, I definitely regressed socially because I wasn't able to talk with people that I needed to talk to. For me, isolated space, I live with my sister and I live with my mother currently, but after I leave my mother, I'm going to live by myself, and so I need to make sure that my finances reflect that because I need that to feel as though I'm working efficiently. I need savings. And then money for me, making sure I set money aside, making sure I set money aside so that I can enjoy parts of life, even if it's just going out and buying dessert, going out to a movie, swing dancing, and paying for that. So my current budget sheet, what my needs are, is $2,500 now. I realize this is perfect for me, and luckily for me, $2,500 allows me to kind of transition into freelance work a lot easier than other people who may realize that their needs are much more. But rent is not that, that's a typo. $950 for rent is actually definitely workable. I want to live on my own, and I can live out in rural areas, so that's possible. I got savings now, got a purse, a little stipend, groceries. It's not that, sorry. Yes, it's not that, but that's essentially what my budget sheet is now. And just a quick comparison of some major things. Oh, time is great, doing good. And one thing I definitely want to end on that I feel like a lot of people, especially starting out, is that let's say you realize that your minimum need may be higher than most. There is no shame in having a part-time job. There's no shame in having a full-time job. If you're taking care of yourself, you're doing the right thing. So yeah, please don't feel as though you're less of an artist, you're less of a creative because you have to work part-time. You don't live in a cave. I want you to create from not just negative emotions, not negative emotions, I mean those are part of it, but positive emotions as well. So now that we understand what our minimum amount is to feel safe, comfortable, and inspired, the next thing that you can do, and what seems easier to do for me, is setting your rate. What's your minimum and maximum value? So the discussion question for this section is, how much should you charge as a beginning composer per minute? And how much should you charge as a professional composer per minute? All right, I'll give you 2 minutes to talk about that. Your groups, DJ Beautiful, if you don't mind. All right. Right. Okay. Awesome. So I'm loving what I heard. Another thing that I heard while walking around that I really liked was a lot of people talking about, or people wanting clarification or mentioning what kind of work am I being asked to do? Like, is it something orchestral? Is it like an 8-bit thing? Are you asking me to make multiple stems because I'm doing, what's that word? Audio implementation, and you make many different things happen. But a lot of different questions that come into play that would really change how much you would charge. And the number that I was hearing like 950, generally around the 1,000 range for professional composers. I actually had someone say 950 for beginning composer. I like that, coming out the gate strong. Hold on, let me set my timer here. But I pulled a few figures. These I pulled from a couple literary sources that someone else pulled. So composing music for games was written by a man named Chance Thomas. He did a lot of music for game adaptations of Lord of the Rings, Warhammer. Yes?
Sorry, can I just confirm that your slides are in USD?
Yes. Okay, yeah, they're in US dollars. Thank you for asking that. And the other one is interactive scoring for games by Michael Sweet, and they've done scores for games titled Dear Reader, Walden, and Arcadia. And pulling from their literary sources, they were saying, starting out, $250 a minute for a beginning composer, professional composer, $1,000 upwards. And I pulled these tweets from a thread started by Josie, who was basically talking about, wanting peers to charge more, and a lot of people chimed in stating what they make, and a lot of the people who chimed in I would consider to be intermediate professional level composers, and many of the rates that they were quoting were a lot of what I heard some of you saying, $9,500 to $1,000 a minute. And for many people, when they hear others charging that amount, this is the face that they make. And a question that I hear many people say is, if you're charging that much, how in the world do you get gigs when the people that come to me don't have enough to pay me, let alone pay me that amount? And I'll talk more about that in the latter half of this particular section. But one thing I do want to mention is that if you would like to do full-time freelancing, meeting your need is a must. And if you want to be able to do it for a long time, not wavering on that is essential. And how I calculate my rates, again, I'm doing this from the focus of per minute of music. Many composers are starting to try and move outside of that, myself included, but since this is something that many of us are familiar with, I'm just looking at it from a per minute of music rate. But what I do is I figure out a per minute of music that meets my needs, and then I double that. And I'm gonna break that down. So pulling from the first source, 2,500 is what I need. And if I write 10 minutes of music at $450 a minute, that helps me meet the need that I need for myself. And breaking that down even more, take the 4,250, multiply it by tax stuff in the US, 650, and then I go further and I take what's left over, and I don't live off all of it. I live off of 70% of it, primarily because the devs that I've worked with have enough money to pay me at my rate, but they don't have enough money at times to pay additional funds to allow me to ensure that my music meets the quality that I want it to. And so rather than having to rely on them to allow me to hire live musicians or get virtual instruments, I just make sure I have the capital to do it myself. So 70% I live off of, 30% I funnel back into my studio for buying instruments, hiring people, so on and so forth. And doing that allows me to meet my minimum. And I don't do much sound design work, but I did try and do some figures. Many people charge by asset, many people charge by the hour. I just decided to pull a figure that I saw a few people quote, which is $100 per asset. If you do sound design and you think this is atrocious, please just say it's atrocious and I will append this. But if I were to do per asset, I'd need to do about 45 assets per month to be able to meet my minimum after all the deducting has happened. And so $425 a minute sounds like absolutely nothing, primarily because it is. And for those of you who have been in this for a bit, understand how dry spells come about. And so you need to make sure you account for that. And so that's why I double. And so doubling that, $850 and $200 per asset if I were approaching sound design from that angle. And doing all the math, if I were charged $850, that would leave me at about 5,000 USD, and assets would be about the same if I doubled that. And so to go even further in, this is essentially how I utilize what I make. So whatever I make from music, I live off of half of that, and then I put the rest in savings, and then I recoup that with a part-time job. So if I make $420 a minute, that should come out to about $2,500. $1,500 goes to bills, $1,000 goes into savings, then I use my part-time job to recoup that savings. And if I do get a gig that pays me at my max, $1,500 goes to bills, everything else goes into savings, and then I still use my part-time job to recoup that $1,000. And what full-time looks like for me, I would feel comfortable going full-time into composition if I had a year to a year and a half savings of what my minimum is, and either a very flexible part-time job or a steady stream of income sources, at least 2 to 3. And that's what I need to feel safe enough to go full-time. It's different for different people, but this is what I need if I want to make that jump, and I'm not there yet. And I'll go more in depth. Will I go more in depth? Maybe I'll go more in depth about the 2 and 3 sources of income sources. So altogether, whenever I have a new project brought to me, I go in $850. And if, depending on what the budget is, I'm willing to go down to $425, but I can't go lower than that. And so if a project can't meet me there, I gotta drop it. But I will go below my minimum, but only if the project shows a lot of potential. I'm just like, absolutely. But those are rare for me. And then if I'm working with a long-time trusted client where I just know working with them, I'm pushed as a composer, the environment is great for me, whatever they're doing is very inspiring, and I know I want to be a part of it. That's the only time I'll go below my minimum, but most new clients, if they can't meet me there, I'm just like, I'm sorry, but I also recommend people that I think could take on the work and might be in a particular area in their career where they can utilize what they can offer them. And to kind of answer a few questions. So the quality over quantity, when you're charging that much, you do lose out on a lot of gigs. And it's because you're choosing quality over quantity, not just in terms of being paid, but in my experience, a lot of the gigs that I've had that couldn't meet me at my minimum generally were extremely frustrating in terms of the environment, in terms of how they pay me, in terms of how they treated me. And if there have been projects that have come to me that couldn't pay me what my rate was, but they did meet the minimum requirements that I would want if I were to work with somebody that couldn't meet me at my minimum. And I would be open to alternative forms of compensation. So Skillshare, if you're with a programmer that does web development and maybe you really want a really spruced up website, have them help you with that. I know Josie in her keynote mentioned working with a dev who taught her coding. So that's obviously something that you can do. RevShare payouts is kind of something that I've tried pitching to devs and nobody's really bit. But essentially, if a dev comes to you with a gig and they're like, hey, we have this amount of work, and you're like, this is $6,000 worth of work, but they can only pay you $2,000. Pay me $2,000, I get residuals until I paid the $4,000, and then you don't have to pay me anymore. Nobody wanted to do that, but I did offer it. And then another thing that you can do, and I'll talk about this more in depth because it's not really a black and white thing, but adjusting your minimum rate. And this is definitely specific on where you are in your career, and I'll talk about that more in part 4, I believe. So just to finalize this, your minimum should definitely grow with your career. Right now I charge $850 a minute, $425 at minimum, but after I finish a couple of projects, I gotta bump it up to about $550 because my needs have changed. Minimum requirements to be safe, comfortable, and inspired have shifted, and so I need to make sure that what I'm getting paid allows me to do that. And if I want to come to a project and give my best, I can give my best if I feel those 3 things, and I want to make sure that every project that I'm a part of, I give 150% of myself. And I can do that if I'm being paid adequately. So now that we finished that, we understand what our minimum is, and now we have rates that allow us to take on projects that pay us that. The next thing is to really be sure of what it is that you want to do or what you feel like you should do, but it should say what you want to do. Don't pay attention to that. But the discussion question for this section is it better to specify or is it better to diversify? Okay. DJ Cute, if you don't mind, go ahead and spin that track. All right, and you guys can start discussing whenever you feel like you would want to. All right. All right. Thank you. I apologize if you're looking online. I forgot to ask the answers that you gave for the second. So we're going to do this one by a show of hands, and I'll ask Jini what they gave online. Show of hands if you believe it's better to specify. Okay. Raise your hand if you think it's probably better to diversify. Oh, it's kind of evenly split. Oh, okay. Online, what y'all got?
I would say... Oh, sorry, there we go. I would say that the results skew towards diversify. Some of the specific answers are specify until you build up your skill base, then diversify when you feel comfortable doing other things you didn't necessarily start out doing.
I like that answer.
Diversify, feel like you're more valuable if you can offer a more all-in-one audio solution to a dev team.
Okay.
Play it to your strengths. If you're only really solid in one or two things, then specify, but if you've got a good skill set, then you'd be better to diversify. Diversify in case of dry spells. You can find work in other areas. And the impression I've always had is that it can be better to get jobs as a beginner if you diversify. But as an artist, I'd prefer to be able to focus on one thing.
Okay. These are all great answers. And walking around, I heard a lot of people mentioning diversify. Screw this timer, I guess. Okay. No, that was supposed to be for that. So my take on this is do whatever does these three things. So as far as enjoy, I do not enjoy sound design. It's the peas on my plate next to macaroni and cheese. And I realized early on that every time I got a project that made me do sound design, I would load that aspect of it and it would affect the project. And so I realized at that point, I'm just not going to do sound design. And I've accepted that it's going to make navigating the industry possibly harder in many respects for me. But this is an arts-based industry. It's extremely competitive. It makes no sense to be doing something that doesn't fill me with excitement every waking moment, especially when it's challenging to begin with. I would definitely recommend doing, and to go off of on enjoy, if I do see a project that wants someone who does composition and sound design, what I do now is I link up with someone whose sound design talents I trust. We talk about our rates and negotiate what we feel is comfortable for both of us, and I pitch to both of us. And that actually worked. I got a mobile job with a really talented sound designer who they did the sound design, I did the composition, and it worked out. The second thing I would say is it's an extremely competitive industry, so do what you're great at because that's what people are going to want to hire you for because you do it well. So you might really be passionate about making wub-wub jazz music for video games, but if you're really good at sound design, I would probably push you over there because that's probably where you could start making financial gains faster. But I am also a very strong believer that if you are extremely passionate about something and you want to do something, if you're willing to take the time out to ensure that your work meets the standard of quality that is necessary for you to be hired, then do that. So if you really want to make wub-wub jazz music, then make sure you're the best wub-wubber so that you're getting paid to make, the necessary quality of music that's expected of you in the industry. And that's kind of all I have to say about that. You have your Austin Wintory's. Primarily what he does is orchestral music. He's getting plenty of gigs. And then you have Jake Hoffman, who basically does whatever he touches. And they both have budgeting careers. I think I used that word right. So yeah, I would just say, if whatever you want to do fits those three things, I'd advise you to partake of that. So moving on now, we understand what our minimum is, we know what rates we want to charge, and we have a very strong understanding of what it is that we choose to do. The next thing is jobs. Jobs. Okay, so the question I have for this is, what's the secret to landing an audio job? Do you know? All right. DJ Handsome Face, whenever you're ready, do this. I'm running out of adjectives. All right. Okay. There's so many different things I heard. I can't talk about all of them. Well, what did the folks online say? If you can share 3 of them with me.
This I can do. First, there was appreciation for DJ Handsome Face, as Monica. I would say that the 3 big ones are confidence, networking, and relationship building, and having a good portfolio or show reel.
Awesome. Okay. So I don't want to make it sound like I actually have an answer to this question. The way I feel is it's complicated. And that goes hand in hand with a lot of the different answers that everyone said, because all the answers that I heard were correct. Your portfolio, the people that you make connections with, trying to put yourself into an environment with other game devs, all of it is important, and at times all of it can be helpful, at times none of it can be helpful. I know that's probably like very melancholic to say. But there's a lot of hidden criteria that goes into why you might not even get a job that has nothing to do with your skill set. I had an opportunity to work with Facebook, no tomatoes please, but they were doing the a storybook thing where they were hiring composers and sound designers to basically add music to the different stories that they were using. They loved my work, they loved that I had a team, and I lived in a completely different time zone. They were like, well, that sucks. And then that was that. Another thing, too, is connections versus talent. I had a developer that I'd worked with for years, and we had been talking about a project that they were really excited about me working on, and they ended up going with a different composer who lived in the same city, who they have had beers with regularly, which I totally get. You know, in-person relationships generally can trump the ones that you make online. And so that's why the true title of this is not jobs, 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 but building connections. Because I truly believe that if you truly want to have a sustainable career in this industry, that is generally the key component. And I feel like a lot of people say networking, but networking to me is different. Networking to me is just like sitting at the table with your mouth open and like waiting for scraps to fall. But like for me, building connection is like walking arm in arm and kind of, making your way up the hill with other people in the industry. So I'm gonna be looking at this from 2 different perspectives, ways that I've seen people try to attain visibility to gain work in proactive ways and reactive ways. And reactive, I just mean you kind of need somebody to invite you in for you to do the work, and then proactive is you don't need someone to hire you or ask you to do anything. You can just do it on your own. And I'm gonna start with reactive. And most of my work has come from online, so I've utilized a lot of these game dev websites, game jams. Don't get paid for those, but you're building rapport with other people who want to be in the industry just as much as you do. Discord forums, highly advise that. Seeking out collaborations, and then applying for jobs that you see. It may seem daunting because you're applying for jobs with people who've probably been doing it a lot longer than you, but I highly advise that you do it. The more often you do it, people start to recognize your name or seeing you often. You can see your growth. You'll go from sending in your demo reel and hearing nothing back to sending in your reel and getting called back to do a sound design test, or getting called back to be paid to do an audio demo for a section of the game. So you can literally see the growth of your career because of how further along you're going in the process. And also having a firmer understanding of the process because you're doing it so often. And you're having an understanding of what different companies or people are expecting of you. And so I'm gonna go in a bit deeper on a few of these. So in section 2, I was talking about different ways you can be compensated if a dev is coming to you that can't pay you your rates. These are the first 2 games I ever worked on, and this is what they were able to offer me at the time. If I'd have come to them and say, pay me $250 or go away, they would have gone away. And if I look at my particular standing at that time and where I was, I could have come to a different agreement that actually would have still been beneficial. I was teaching at that time. I didn't have any games underneath my belt, and both of these games to me were beautiful. They were making me write music that was extremely challenging and music that I hadn't heard a lot of games having. And so and I was also using nothing but stock instruments at the time. And so if I was to change what my minimum was, and instead of looking at $250 a minute, my focus was, you know what, from these games in this amount of time, I want to be able to increase all of my samples to something more professional, it actually would have benefited me. Again, this was at the very beginning of my career. I absolutely cannot do this now. But it's just something that I want y'all to take into consideration, but also take into consideration where you are in your career. This just might not be something that you can manage. Another thing too, Discord forums, a really great friend named Megan Carnes posted a tweet where she was asking people, how did you get the current gigs that you have, or some of the gigs that you've received currently? And for a lot of people, a lot of the gigs that they got were from clients that they had before or referrals from friends. Some people got it from cold calls, but overwhelmingly, a lot of people were getting work from people they had worked with prior, which goes back to needing to be in the community. For a few of the games that I've had, I'm working on like 4 now. No, 4 games, but 4 projects. 3 of them have come because other composers have forwarded them to me. One of them I got from a cold call, and I'm super surprised I even got it. So I want to include a few online spaces that are extremely inviting, extremely helpful. And if you're going into these spaces, the biggest thing I want to say is go in looking to give. And giving doesn't have to be financial. Giving is something as simple as seeing somebody creating a track, asking for feedback, and you listening to that and giving concise feedback. Or if you see somebody sending a message saying they're having a bad day, literally giving words of encouragement to kind of pull them out of whatever slump that they're having. Beast of Play Games 2 is great. Asian Game Audio Network, please only go there if you fit the demographic. Future Audio Collective, and then seriously, Twitter. Animation gig that I finished up last year, I literally got because a composer couldn't take it, and they were looking for composers who would be interested in it, and I got it off of Twitter. So Twitter actually is a pretty solid resource for many people in audio. This is not a word, I made it up. So reproactive is kind of in between. So it's reactive because you can kind of do it yourself. No, proactive because you can start it yourself, but reactive because I advise you to get permission. But I stole this from a really great composer by the name of Fail Positive. And basically what they would do is they would find devs who posted GIFs of their work. And I'm pretty sure y'all seen people do this. Yeah. But this is the first person I've seen do it that I was inspired by. But they would take GIFs that devs would post of their work, create music, smash them together, get the devs permission, and then post it on the Twitter. And they actually gained, I think, about 2 or 3 gigs doing that. I did it, was not successful, but I did get one really awesome gig, and I'm really happy about it because the developer that came to me was a full-time dev, had done it for, I think, 5 or 6 years, solo dev. I think out of their entire career, only hired 1 other composer. And they were like, I love what you did so much, I'm gonna give you money. And I don't do this for people. So I felt really proud that they were willing to pay me to do that. So I thought it was really cool. And another really good friend of mine named Dustin collaborated with someone who did animations, and he would do the sound design for that and just post it on his Twitter. And I love it I enjoy doing this because I like doing warm-ups, so it helps me with my writing chops, but also I get to pay homage to other game devs, and it helps me do research. So it's like I'm getting to showcase amazing work that other devs are doing. I'm getting to do research so I can see what other devs are doing. And there's engagement between us devs and other people who also like what they do. And other reactive is in person. If you have the opportunity to do it, I highly advise to take advantage of it. Indie game meetups, in-person game jams, and if you are in a particular area where those aren't available to you, I highly advise you to try and create a space of your own. You'd be surprised how many people would be open to you just using their spot for game development stuff. And as far as being proactive, writing fake game scores, you don't need to wait for someone to hire you to write what you want to write, just write what you want to write. Christoph has a really awesome album that he released that is inspired by Splatoon, really solid stuff. Insane in the Rain, if you don't know his work, Carlos is freaking amazing. He did covers for like 10 years on YouTube and is now doing his own stuff, which is phenomenal. Russell Torres is another person who does video game music covers, really solid composer. And then a really awesome colleague of mine, Chris Kirk, went to college, got a master's in composition, realizes that he has really solid sound design chops and has been transitioning into sound design, has been doing rescoring stuff, and I think he's gotten a couple gigs doing scoring, doing sound design because of some of the rescoring animations that he's done. And other things that I would advise, Akash and his sound effects video series, creating music packs or sound effects packs to be used in the Unity asset store. My friend Cal, who I've outlined in red, is a music composer who decided to bond with other developers and create a game studio of his own, and just work on developing games rather than waiting on people to come to him to hire him for games. He was like, well, I'll just do my own. And then talking doesn't have to be game conferences, literally just sharing the knowledge that you know in your general area. The more you talk in front of people, apparently they think you know stuff and they want to give you money, so that's something you can do. And one thing I do want to be transparent about is a lot of it is luck. The first 2 games that I got, the devs had already had a lot of people who sent in compositions for them, and they really liked my work. That I could have easily been the people that sent in work to them that they rejected. And so for me, taking the proactive route, writing for games that you want to write for, collaborating with other people, can put you in a position to be prepared for the opportunities that come your way and just to try and do the best that you can to do that, because luck does play a huge part in this, being at the right place in the right time. And so the last section is the long haul. How can I achieve a sustainable career in the video game music industry? And this one is a quiz. Hey. Okay, so how many of these audio designers make their living solely from game audio? Okay, all right. DJ Cute Face, let's do it. Okay. So before we move on, I do want to preface with a few things. So these folks here do sound design primarily. Gordon McGladdery owns a sound design company, but he's also the composer for it. So, they dabble in both of those things. And I also want to go a step further. These 2 folks here actually aren't freelancers. They have contract work. So that was kind of a trick in there. I'm sorry. I guess, what were the answers that were given online?
There are
Give me
quite
2.
a few guesses
I'm
of
sorry.
none.
I only take 2, y'all.
There are quite a few guesses of none.
None? Okay.
And then I'd say the other main guess is like 1, 2, or 3.
Okay.
So low numbers.
So I reached out to a few of these and also did research based on their background. So I would give my never-born first child that this is correct. But starting with sound design, raise your hand if you think 100% of them do solely game audio work. 75? 50? 25? None? Okay. All right, composers, raise your hand if you think 100% are in games. 75? 50? 25? None? Okay. Okay, so this is kind of what I came up with. So of the sound design, Majority of them actually do solely game audio work. Composers, no. Gordon McGladdery, like I mentioned, he owns a sound design company, but he also does composition work. A lot of their work are in games, but they've also done art and like installations for museums. William Roget, majority of his work is in sound design, but he also is a co-founder of Impact Soundworks, so he gets residual income from that company. Austin Winery has done film scores for like Ever on top of game work, and then Sarah Schachner has done movies, TVs, film, music library licensing. And so this brings me to the second part, the latter half of this, which is fairly short, which is if you want sustainability in video games as a freelancer, this is what I would suggest. Seriously, be a sound designer and do audio programming. I generally see a lot of people looking for sound designers and audio programmers, although more in the contractual side of things. But as far as freelancing, honestly, being multidisciplined, diversifying actually, does help you a lot with trying to create a sustainable career in video games as a freelancer. And if you're like me and you realize that you don't want to diversify and you would rather do one or the other, it may be that freelancing part-time may be extended for you until you're able to gain a foothold in the industry enough for you to be able to do it full-time. And so, quick overview of all this. When you're setting your monthly needs, make sure it allows you to feel safe, comfortable, and inspired. When you're setting your rates, make sure your rates allow you to meet your minimum, double them at least to account for dry spells. Whatever you want to do, make sure you can do it well and it's something that you strongly desire. Ways that you can be visible, there are proactive ways and reactive ways. I highly advise don't wait for somebody to come to you. Just create and put your work out there. And if you want to achieve a sustainable career in video games, I would highly suggest that you diversify. The last one I never talked about, but this one pertains more so to me because I realized that diversifying is not for me. I've understood that the video game industry solely being where I stand is probably not going to happen. And so I've done work for animation. I've worked with people on like 1 or 2 films. I'm actually working with somebody to help orchestrate a musical because I would like to be an orchestrator, and I realized I've enjoyed it, and a lot of people make money orchestrating. So if you do realize that one discipline is more suitable to you, then there's a good chance you're going to have to look outside of the video game industry if focusing on one aspect and being freelance is something that's very important to you. And that's all I have. These are my socials. If Q&A is going to be short, but if there's any question if you have a question that you want to ask me and it doesn't get asked today, please feel free to email me. I will answer any question that you throw at me, as long as it's a respectful one. So, yeah, that's all I have, and thank you so much.
So we do have a few questions through Slido.
Cool.
And 5 minutes to answer them. So
Dang,
you
that
timed
took too
your
long.
talk perfectly. No, you did perfect. The most upvoted one is from Mina, which is, how do you navigate building connections if your social battery is relatively limited or you deal with social anxiety?
There's no right way to be social in my book. I think it really goes into understanding how do you show up for people and then showing up for people that way. Let's say if for you, showing up for people is just maybe not having a long phone conversation, but sending an email like maybe every month, being like, hey, just checking up on you, how you doing? So understand what it is that how you operate, and just show up for people in a way that works for you. As long as it's genuine and you're coming caring, people will see that. You don't have to be extroverted. So don't worry about that. Hopefully that answers that question.
I think so. On a really practical note, do you use or recommend a software package or platform that helps with managing freelancing, including scheduling work, invoicing, etc.?
I'm horrible with that. No. No, I'm sorry. I don't.
Good luck.
I don't. Yeah, I'm sorry. I do use checklists. That's helped me organize things. But yeah, I'm pretty bad. Like when I write in my DAW, I don't color anything, I don't label anything. It's terrible. So I'm the worst person to ask about that. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Couple of questions about RevShare. How should you take RevShare into consideration when determining a per minute rate? And have you ever done a gig with a dev or client where you get rev share from the game perpetually, like forever?
I'm gonna have you ask the first one again, but the second one I can answer. I have had a gig where I got perpetual rev share from a client, but unfortunately it was with a game that really didn't make much. So, I mean, I got revenue when it was first coming in, but now it's dwindled off into basically nothing. So, I do have things in perpetuity, but nothing that is substantial. And can you repeat the first part as well?
How should you take rev share into consideration when determining a per minute rate?
Per minute rate. I guess that depends. If you're trying to do the rev share payout thing, you don't just be upfront about how much you need per minute that you need, and then they pay you that, and then you get it back on the rev share. I don't think you need to barter at all because you're already going in with a lot of work and getting paid a little, and you don't even know if you're going to get paid what you need on the back end. So definitely go in with making sure your needs are met. Yes?
Have you ever done a project where you haven't handed over exclusive rights to the music so you can reuse it?
I have, but majority of them, no. But that is something like if there was one client that came to me and asked about it, and my rates were a little bit difficult for them, and I did broach that to them, like we could do it to where we could do a non-exclusive agreement, so that way you can get bespoke music, like you're the first to use it, but I can also reuse it, but they didn't really like that, and so it didn't work out. But I have tried to offer that to people. Thank you for your question.
Very last one. Can you tell us what musical you're working on?
Oh, that's so cute. It's called Outcast. It's actually really interesting because the person I'm working with is Christian. I'm not Christian, but I was brought up in a Christian background. And entering it, I definitely was kind of like, I don't know if I want to do this. But I actually really like the way that the writer has kind of welded the themes of Christianity into this, to where it's not like a hit, like it's not preachy or anything. I was like, oh, I would actually go see this. So it's like, it's nothing big. It's like a small set of instruments, just piano, bass, 2 guitars, sax, violin, clarinet, and flute. And I'm really, like, it's actually a lot of fun. I'm really enjoying it, yeah. So thank you for that question.
Fantastic.
Yes. I'm sorry.
All right.
Absolutely. Going back to like being great at what you do, presentation is imperative to that. And you can be, there have been plenty of compositions that I've heard that are stellar, and I just know they're probably going to struggle. Me included, I'm still working on my mixing. And I know there are a lot of times where I can't get my idea across because the production side of it is failing. So it's at this point in any audio that you do, like you need to have really strong mixing chops, because for a lot of people, it doesn't really matter if the composition is interesting. If it doesn't meet the professional level of quality, they'll probably go on to somebody else who has something that's more generic but is professional sounding. So.
Cool. We have unfortunately run out of time for questions, but can everyone just give
Thank you so
Jasmine
much.
another hand?
Appreciate it. Thank you.